Okay, so I figured I'd try YouTube for the first time and upload it there because Facebook lives and stuff like that get removed so quickly now, and people want this information for a bit longer. And maybe other people on YouTube will find this interesting as well, from my experience with the sugar diet, from what I've read, what I've been reading about, what I've experimented with over the last few weeks. It's been close to a month now, and where I've gotten with it, plus the research and the digging that I've done, because I also like to understand all of this stuff rather than just dig in and follow it blindly. If you followed me for a while, or you're in my groups and that sort of stuff, you'll know that I'm a big fan of keto. I did carnivore for a long time and I got great results. I used a cyclical keto diet for most of the time that I followed it, which is basically the sugar diet on the days that you're not doing keto. It's a bit different, obviously, and you're using some metabolic effects. I'm not going to go into detail of the cyclical keto diet today, but I do want to bring in, or start this video with the commonalities between how the keto diet works and where the sugar diet works, because some of the factors are very similar and they both do stimulate FGF21, which is the mechanism that a lot of people are talking about with the sugar diet, both through restriction of protein. Okay, so a proper ketogenic diet is obviously a low protein diet if you're talking about the therapeutic method of it. And so that high fat, low protein also stimulates FGF21. And so they are running on the same mechanisms. The main difference between those low protein states is the FGF21 gets ramped up very, very quickly in a high sugar environment, in a high fructose environment, because fructose does stimulate that. Now, I do want to be clear though, both states are a metabolic stress, both the ketosis and the FGF21 signaling mechanisms are actual stresses on the system, which is why they happen, because the body does have a need and requirement for protein. And so our metabolism and other things get ramped up to help us go in search of that protein. So when you're lacking in protein, you'll keep eating and generally not feel as full until you hit that protein target. So Ted Naiman and others have talked about the protein leverage hypothesis, where basically animals will keep eating until they hit a predetermined protein threshold. And so in ketosis, proper ketosis, you're on low protein, high fat, and the sugar diet is also low protein. And so the other thing I want to be clear on is these are both restrictive structures to dieting. Now, the reality is, if you want to lose weight, you've got to restrict something. You're either going to track calories or macros, or restrict carbs or restrict fat. You're going to restrict something, right? That's what is going to lead to weight loss. Now, a lot of people are saying that you don't necessarily have to cut calories on the sugar diet, but they used to say that about the keto diet too, and I don't think that's going to come out in the wash. You know, you may get some increase in energy expenditure, and you do get that on keto. Not initially. Initially it drops, but then after you become what they call fat adapted, you do see energy expenditure increase. And with the sugar diet, you're probably seeing that same thing. And because sugar is a fast burning fuel, you're probably seeing that response happen a lot quicker than you would in ketosis. Ketosis takes a few days generally for people to get into ketosis, where FGF ramps up very, very quickly, like within 12 hours of protein restriction. And then once you increase fructose and sugar, you do see the FGF21 in the studies increasing in the bloodstream quite rapidly and quite quickly. And what they find is, like, between 12 hours and up to about 3 days, you're hitting about your peak FGF21 output. So what then makes it beneficial, what I've found, and from what I've read and from talking to other people who have been doing this a lot longer than me, is that in the low protein state and the low fat state, you're going to preferentially be taking in obviously lots and lots of carbs, lots and lots of sugar, and that's going to ramp up FGF21, which does and has been shown to increase energy expenditure, which is your energy outside of the equation. So calories are still going to count. You're just being able to eat more within that calorie count. Just scrolling up on my screen. So whilst ketosis takes a few days, FGF21 is going to happen relatively quickly, particularly with that increase in fructose, which is why it's important that we base this on sugar, which is why you're seeing the honey diet, fruit to noon, all these other iterations of this that have been around for a while. You know, you got the banana lady, Freely. Jurian Ryder has talked about this a lot, and I have been following him and getting information from him as well, because he's been doing this for about 10, 15 years. You know, and now, whilst I want to emphasize I'm definitely not vegan, my meat consumption has dropped quite a bit over my experiment with this. And so I'm probably only having the one meat meal a day on the days that I'm having meat. And on the days where I'm not, obviously there's none. There's just fruits, honey, maple syrup, fruit juice, and I do have some candy to up my intake because I'm exercising a lot. Now the other thing I've noticed a lot is my energy does go up. I do feel like I want to be more active, and I have been getting lots and lots of steps, and it hasn't felt like I forced that. I've just wanted to do that, and I've wanted and felt like I needed to be more active, but that's not the case for everybody. Okay, so just going to go into some of the details that I've found, going to help you put a bit of a picture together for yourselves now, so that you can maybe try this out if you're interested and actually have a bit of a concise plan to use rather than just trying to piece it all together. So protein restriction seems to be the signal that ramps up your metabolism, okay, in either state, all right, which makes sense because if you were restricted in protein and it's an essential nutrient, you'd have to go out and hunt for it. And so if you had no energy, it would be very hard to go out and hunt for it. Obviously, this is my hypothesis and theory. It is backed by some other people's thoughts and thinkings, okay? But this is how I would portray it. Your energy is going to go up because you're going to go in search of that protein. Now, high sugar, in the absence of fats and protein, means that it's very hard to store any fat. So when they've done overfeeding studies with either fat or carbs, what they found is not much of those carbs are actually stored as fat. And even in really extensive, really high overfeeding studies, even when that overfeeding was done with fructose type foods and that sort of stuff, it's actually the fats in the diet that are getting stored as fat. So in the absence, which is why this seems to be so effective for a lot of people, in the absence of fat, it's very hard to store any extra fat. And so if you are in a calorie deficit, you're going to lose fat fairly quickly and fairly efficiently, because whatever energy needs that your body has is going to be taken from fat, because there's very little of it then being shuttled into that area, which to me makes a fair bit of sense, which, to be honest, with years of keto eating and that sort of stuff, I never really dug into this stuff much because it worked for me really, really well. And even as a nutritionist, when I was coaching people on balanced diets and that sort of stuff, like we did track and be sort of restricting in calories and that sort of stuff. So I never really dug into the other side of high carb until I saw this popping up and everybody tagged me in it and wanted my opinion on this sugar diet. So that's where I am now, and now I've learned and increased my awareness of this sort of stuff and dug in a little bit and been testing it and seeing great results. You know, I did start this plan at 93 kilos and now I sit around 88, mostly because I haven't been overly strict in trying to lose weight on the diet the last week and a bit. I'm having a bit of a push this week now. It's Monday today, so I'm doing 3 days of what I'm going to go into called the sugar fasting. But up until now, I haven't really done that. Okay, I've just been sort of, I tried it out for the first couple of weeks and I did lose that 5 kilos relatively quickly over the 2 weeks. But then last week I had a bit of a break and was just experimenting with some of the other protocols that I've been seeing around, like the Fruit Till Noon, Joe Binley's stuff, and some other bits and pieces. Just trying to put it all together and see what would happen. And I didn't gain any weight. And now I'm just ticking away with some aggressive weight loss just to see what happens over the next week. So a lot of people have asked me whether high fructose is going to lead to liver fat gain because of non-alcoholic fatty liver type accumulation. And what they found, again, in the absence of fat and excess energy, okay, this comes back down to calorie balance. All right, I don't actually think you need to count calories, but I'll talk about that a bit later. But calorie balance is going to matter. But in the absence of fat, which obviously fat having 9 calories per gram is going to push calories up a lot further and make it much easier to overeat, plus fat gets stored very easily as fat. In those cases, sorry, I've just lost track of where I am. Yeah, it doesn't seem to get stored as fat because that fructose goes to the liver and then becomes glucose or other things like lactate and stuff like that. It converts it to other things for either storage in the liver or dispersal to other areas of the body. So it doesn't look like fructose actually has much storage capacity, even when they've done excessive overeating style diets using fructose particularly. And they use all these mechanisms to record and see how the fat is being stored, where it's being stored and where it's coming from. And they've shown that maybe in excessive overeating, you might be storing 10 grams of that fructose as fat over a day, which is minimal compared to what they've looked at with overfeeding of more balanced protocols, and they see a lot of fat storage. Okay, so it's very, very interesting. It is one of those things that we get told when you hear about it, because fructose goes preferentially to the liver as apart from glucose, which goes into the bloodstream. Now, one of the benefits of this means that when you're eating fruits and sugar, they don't have the insulin load that starches do. And starches do seem to be problematic for a lot of people when they're following this diet. And so you do want to make sure that each meal has fructose in it, because it's actually going to lower the insulin spike, lower that issue of the high insulin, and it is going to shuttle some of that, preferentially half of whatever you eat, pretty much 50-50 glucose and fructose in most of these high sugar foods. Half of that's going to go to the liver initially and bypass the insulin signaling, and then the liver is going to do what it does with that fructose, either turning it into storage of actual glycogen and other carbohydrates, or breaking it down into other things that it needs. Now, some of the people that I have been referencing, Joe Binley, his book is great. He's just put out a book. He's just updated it again. That's been really, really useful. That cleared up a whole heap of the bits and pieces, and there's a bunch of references at the end of that book. Anabology, another one who talks about the sciencey stuff and goes into depth with this honey diet, which is very, very similar. Some differences, obviously. All of these protocols have some differences. I quite like the honey diet idea of honey and sugar up until about 3 p.m., bit of a break from 3 until dinner time, and then having some protein and lower fat or high fat, depending on what your goals are, dinner. Okay, but yeah, anabology, Joe Binley. Now obviously there's Mark Bell. He sort of got me started on this because he's the videos that everyone was tagging me in. I've followed him for years with all of his other stuff, and he was obviously a big proponent of keto and carnivore before this. But obviously now he's getting great results with this and seeing great results from his community from this, which is why a lot of people tagged me in this, and I thought I'd give it a go to share my thoughts on it. Now, Cole Robinson is obviously a big leader in this community. He's been pushing this. He's the reason that Mark got onto it. I don't particularly like Cole's mannerisms. I'm going to say it. No, he's doing lots of good. He's helping lots of people. Some people really respond to being called fat pigs. Okay, that's not how I coach people. It's not what I do. Maybe I'm just not as aggressive as people think I am. But yeah, to me, it doesn't make much sense to call people fat pigs and berate them to try and get the results out of them. But that's just me. His information seems to be really, really good, and he's obviously got this rolling. And then there's always the vegan Jurian writer. I'm not a fan of vegan dieting. He basically doesn't eat any protein, and he's always also don't like his attitude very much, where he's always washboarding his abs and showing how lean he is, but he's really just skinny to me. Okay, not very muscular, but that is just a different direction to me. So he's obviously getting great results with his athletes and that sort of stuff, and been doing this a really long time. So I don't want to say they're wrong at all. They aren't. They've been leading this drive for a very, very long time. I just don't particularly like how those two, Jurian Ryder and Cole, go about it. Whereas Mark seems to be a lot more level-headed, Anabology is a lot more scientific, and Joe Binley has been getting great results with his athletes for a really long time, and he basically did a bodybuilding prep living only on candy. And so he's tested, tried out all these things, plus come from the other side of keto and carnivore. So they are coming from similar places to me. So it makes a lot of sense. Now, what I suggest for you to give a go, people are going to look for, if you're looking to lose lots of weight, I suggest going with what is called a sugar fast, what everyone is calling sugar fasting. While I hate that name, that is just what it's being called. And that is 3 to 7 days of just sugar. Now those sugary foods are fruit, maple syrup, honey, fruit juice, low fat, very important, low fat candy if you're going to have some candy. But it needs to be in that order. Fruit juice, they should be the first two. Maple syrup and honey, okay? And then candy just to fill in any gaps, or if you happen to be hungry. You know, you can snack on some candy and it's not going to be the end of the world. You're actually going to probably improve your results. But it's also easiest to overeat that stuff, where it's harder to overeat the other stuff. Okay, the signaling for the body seems to be a lot better when you're eating the other foods for your hunger signals and that sort of stuff. And like I did say, calories do matter still. So you're still trying not to overeat, all right? And candy will just make that very hard for a lot of people, especially if they have lots of weight to lose and probably aren't as sensitive to insulin, even though this diet probably does improve insulin sensitivity. Okay, so that's the key to your sugar fasting days. So you do 3 to 7 days of that, and then you will have a normal day, which I will explain in a little bit after I go over why we might not need to worry about protein, because I know that's another question that people are going to have. Why aren't we eating any protein? We've all been told that protein is so important to us. I generally used to eat 200 grams of protein a day, every day. And at the moment, it's between 80 and 120 grams a day for me. Very big drop in my protein. But when you're following these protocols and you're eating lots of carbs, particularly in the absence of fat, protein obviously, because of this conversation, but when you're eating lots and lots of carbs, that becomes protein sparing. Now, one of the mechanisms that a lot of people talk about on a keto diet, for example, is you need some protein in there for gluconeogenesis to keep your carb levels and blood glucose levels stable. So some of that protein during ketosis and in general, some of that protein is going to get converted into amino acids that will then get converted into glucose. So obviously on a high carb diet, the need for gluconeogenesis is very minimal, if anything, at all. You know, because you have enough carbs coming in all the time to keep that blood sugar stable. Muscles are always constantly full of glycogen, so you don't need to replenish them. Now, this also happens during normal fasting, but it happens with this. The body improves amino acid recycling and adaptive responses to the need for protein in the absence of protein. So how your body breaks down amino acids to get them and the body's need for them actually decreases in times of low protein. So the body adapts to make sure you don't start losing it. This is why they've shown that water fast and that sort of stuff. After about 48 hours, you see changes in how fast the body is losing protein. Now, I'm not saying you won't lose any, which is why my protocol that I would suggest would be no more than 3 days of sugar fasting once you get to your weight loss. But and as the other people in this sphere are talking about, if you're really overweight, losing 5 grams of muscle over time, but losing 50 kilos of weight is probably going to be more healthy. So you don't really need to stress about losing that little bit of muscle if you really have a lot of weight to use. Now, if you're leaner, you probably have more worries about that, but I'll go over in how to maintain this stuff. Okay, so this is why I think sugar fasting is probably better than fasting on its own, because even though they've shown that fasting, after a period of time, you minimize that muscle breakdown and that protein breakdown, this would stop it even more because you're taking away the need for that gluconeogenesis. So that's going to be even more muscle preserving, more protein sparing than fasting with no food at all. Okay? And I've never been a fan of fasting anyway, so I'm a little bit biased, and I will be honest with that. Now, on your normal days, after your phase of 3 to 7 days of sugar fasting, you would eat a normal day. So that would be protein, meat, eggs, starches. Okay, and now if you're still wanting to lose weight, you want to keep your fats under about 30 grams on those days still. So you wouldn't be going overboard on the fat, you'd eat leaner cuts of meat and that sort of thing. But if the goal is continued weight loss, you still want to keep the fats relatively low, because as I said at the start, it's your dietary fat that's mostly being stored as fat. And so if you can stay in a calorie deficit on those days, either track them or just don't eat a lot of food, then that's going to help you keep going. Okay, or you could do a keto carnivore style a day and maybe switch gears a little bit, create that metabolic flexibility of going backwards and forwards, and so that way you're restricting on the other side of things. Now remember, the FGF21 doesn't kick up as fast on a ketogenic diet, so you do have that benefit, mostly because you're probably eating some protein along the way. So carnivore day, I feel, would be a bit better than a keto day on those other days, just to get that protein in and make sure you're minimizing that opportunity for protein loss. Once you get a bit leaner and you're closer to your goals, I think 1 to 3 days of sugar fasting is about all you'd need. Okay, if you're trying to be a bit aggressive with your fat loss, you'd go out to the 3 and then have higher protein days on 1 to 3 days in between. So you'd have 1 to 3 days of sugar fasting, 1 to 3 days of higher protein, and then it's up to you whether those higher protein days have fats below 50 grams or above 50 grams. It really depends on your goal. So if you didn't want to lose fat too aggressively, or you were really lean and wanting to optimize both things, you'd probably keep fats a bit higher on those days, so that way you're optimizing your hormonal health and other things that may downregulate on the sugar fast. Okay, but if you wanted to be more aggressive, you do similar. It'd be 1 to 3 days. You can literally do 1 on, 1 off, 1 on, 1 off, 1 on, 1 off, and just keep chipping away. As long as you're tracking the scales and your measurements and you're seeing it go downwards, you're doing the right thing. You're achieving the goal that you want. Now, for a longer term structure, I would see this as an organic sort of intervention. Okay, the honey diet and some other ones talk about maybe having fruit till noon or sugar till noon, early part of the day. That'll ramp up FGF21 early in the day. And then depending on your goals, particularly if you're looking to build muscle, you'd probably introduce some protein after your workout and protein later in the day before shifting gears and to dinner. And you'd probably have some protein and starch with dinner, maybe some fats too, and then you'd reset yourself the next day with that sugar in the morning up until noon or whenever you felt like it. Then you could also use the sugar fasting days as sort of a balancing. So if you happen to have a really big weekend, for example, and go out and have a bit too much to drink and too much to eat, you could use a few days of sugar fasting to get that weight back off relatively quickly. But what I would like to sort of finish with is these things that I'm talking about: keto, sugar fasting, all of these things, they're tools. So what they do is become more tools in your toolbox for you to use, you to experiment with, you to play with and see where they fit for you. Some people aren't going to like this. Some people won't enjoy this. Some people will lean too far into candy and realize that they're overdoing it. Okay, which is not what I recommend. I recommend fruit, then fruit juice and honey, and then candy as the last sort of option here. okay? But if you look at this as a tool and you try it out and you get good results and it helps you get to the weight you want to be, then you can use this as a maintenance tool. You know, you could do a few days of normal eating and then just throw in a sugar fast day, or you could do sugar days, um, sugar diet type days, which is just basically sugar all through the day and just a normal meal of a nighttime, and maybe that helps you maintain. You could just eat normally most of the time and then just throw in a day when you feel fit. These all become tools, and I do think people need to eat a little bit seasonally and have phases. So I still think keto and carnivore are going to be useful phases for me, and so I will go into that, and then I will use the sugar goal, like the sugar diet type ideas as well. Now I have more tools in my tool belt that I can manipulate and play around with and create that metabolic flexibility. So I do become a good fat burner. I do become a good sugar burner. I keep my insulin sensitivity high. All of these other health factors. I keep my LDL and cholesterol in check. And this comes down to regular health checks and that sort of stuff to make sure that you're not doing more harm than good. And I haven't had that done since I've started. Obviously, I've been doing this about a month. But it's all tools in your toolbox, so that what you're creating is, and I've talked about this a lot with most people that I coach, we're creating your diet rather than following a diet and having lots of strict rules and that sort of stuff. You want to find some principles of different things that work and use that to create your diet. Now, I hope this was helpful. If anybody wants more information, feel free to comment, and feel free to share this with whoever you want, tag people, that sort of thing. But also I'd love to hear your thoughts on what I've just done. Bye.